Fall Classic, it's all over.
The Atlanta Braves coming away victorious Tuesday over the Houston Astros to win the World Series 4-2. It was an unlikely road for the Braves, the club never having a record above 500 on the season until August 6th, but a second-half surge scored them a fourth straight NL East crown. At 88-73, Atlanta had the worst record of any MLB playoff team, but the underdogs took down the Milwaukee Brewers and the 2020 champion LA Dodgers en route to their first National League pennant in 22 years. It's the Braves' fourth World Series win in franchise history and their first since 1995. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck. Zero down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at GuamAutospot.com.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of our free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Nope, it shall not be infringed. We hope that the United States Supreme Court is going to pick up on that message next week. I believe it's on Wednesday that the Supreme Court is going to hear that case out of the state of New York about the issuance of carry permits. By way of background, New York has an extremely strict, New York City and New York State's strict gun control laws. For a while, if you owned a firearm in the city of New York, the only place you could carry that firearm was to one of 6 approved target practice ranges. Other than that, you couldn't take it anywhere. So it seems that even though District of Columbia versus Heller interpreted the Second Amendment as saying a person had a personal right to keep a firearm in his house for his protection, they forgot about a couple of other words in the Second Amendment, which reads again, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of our free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So I have my own definition for bearing arms. To me, to bear arms means you're a cop or a soldier. Citizens don't bear arms. Only military or law enforcement types do. That's the minority view. Others would say anyone is capable of bearing an arm, which means you're just carrying it, taking it with you as you proceed on your daily business. But in New York, you can't do that unless you have a permit, which is very hard to come by. And that matter now is challenge that lies before the Supreme Court. You'll remember this happened last year, and even though it was on the Supreme Court docket, New York City and New York State changed their laws to moot out the Supreme Court challenge, afraid of what might happen. So I have an article today from Bearing Arms by a gentleman named Cam Edwards, and this is what he says. A law professor says New York Kerry case could upend gun control movement. The gun control movement, people that say that nobody should ever have a gun for any reason whatsoever, that manufacturers of firearms should be punished, on and on and on, ignoring the fact that gun control, frankly, doesn't work and cannot work, certainly not in the United States. We have so many firearms in circulation right now, it would be an impossible task, even if the government were to pass a law that passed constitutional muster, that cops should go out and collect every single firearm in existence. It couldn't be done. And if it could, a lot of people would resist it. And if it happened, it really wouldn't have much impact on crimes committed with guns, because it's kind of like putting a no parking sign out in front of the bank. And nobody is parking there, so the bank robber, is looking for a good place to park so his driver can stay behind the wheel. A couple of robbers run in and rob the bank and jump in the car and tear away. They're really not deterred very much by that no parking sign when they come to rob the bank. And it's the same thing with gun control legislation. People who want to commit crimes with guns, for instance, bank robbery, kidnapping, whatever, are not going to be deterred by the fact that there's a law against having a gun. It just isn't going to work. So this professor named Adam Winkler says that this New York case before the court could upend gun control movement. And of course, I'm sitting here with my fingers crossed saying, I hope so. So Winkler is not just any law professor. He's a constitutional professor at UCLA and one of the media's go-to experts on the Second Amendment, because he's usually quick with a quote about why, quote, reasonable gun safety measures shouldn't be overturned by the courts. The year before the Supreme Court overturned Washington, D.C.'s ban on handguns, for instance, Winkler argued in a law review article that strict scrutiny shouldn't be applied to gun control laws, but even if that's the legal standard adopted by courts, judges shouldn't let that stand in the way of upholding almost every gun control law that faces a court challenge. Now, we've talked about strict scrutiny before here on Tall Tales, so let's turn on the Law and Order notebook. When the court examines equal protection questions, there are 3 degrees of scrutiny that it would apply to the question. The top level of scrutiny is called strict scrutiny. We have a middle level level of scrutiny, and then we have the minimal level, which is called reasonable state purpose. So this is what strict scrutiny means. Strict scrutiny is a form of judicial review that courts use to determine the constitutionality of certain laws. To pass strict scrutiny, the legislature must have passed a law to further a, quote, compelling government interest, and must have narrowly tailored the law to achieve that interest. That's strict scrutiny, and it's really hard to get by strict scrutiny. So there are suspect classifications that trigger the application of strict scrutiny. For instance, race, national origin, religion, alienage, And then there are classifications that burden fundamental rights. Now, fundamental rights is one of those really nice phrases. Oh, it's a fundamental right. That no one is exactly sure what the hell it means. But everybody likes to toss it around. Voting is a fundamental right. Well, it isn't, but that didn't stop people from saying it. Okay, so classifications burdening fundamental rights. Denial or dilution of the vote, interstate migration, access to the courts, and other rights recognized as fundamental. A nice tautological definition there. Then you've got mid-level scrutiny. The government must show that the challenged classification serves an important state interest and that the classification is at least substantially related to that interest. Quasi-suspect classifications include gender, illegitimacy, gender or illegitimacy. And then we have the rational state basis scrutiny. The government need only show that the challenge classification is rationally related to serving a legitimate state interest. Minimum scrutiny applies to all classifications other than strict or intermediate, although some Supreme Court cases suggest a slightly closer scrutiny, etc. So the rational basis test, and I've talked about this before, a rational basis test means this, that a court, when looking at a statute, would say, that particular classification is rationally related to a legitimate state interest. No one has to prove that that's the reason that the law was passed or that anybody even knew about this rational state basis at the time the law was passed. Is anything you could figure out, advance to the court, say, well, this would be a rational state purpose. And if you can convince the court that it is, then that classification passes statutory or constitutional muster. Now, we have an equal protection clause, and I'll read it again. Part of the 14th, the 5th and the 14th have equal protection clauses. The 14th says, that would be the one that would apply to states. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, equal protection has been defined to mean equal benefit of the law as well as the equal protection of the law. So laws, the basic purpose of laws is discrimination. Every form of discrimination is not invidious discrimination that implicates the Equal Protection Clause. For instance, when it comes to driving an automobile, there is discrimination against people that don't have driver's licenses. If you do have a driver's license and you're operating a motor vehicle legally, the cop's not going to be able to stop you. If you don't have a driver's license and a cop finds out you don't have it, bad things can happen to you. That's discrimination. Is there a rational state purpose? Well, yeah. That is that we want to reserve the highways for safe drivers, and requiring tests and licenses is rationally related to that state purpose. So it works. Now, as far as the Second Amendment is concerned, we don't know exactly what level of judicial scrutiny a court would apply. In both Heller and McDonald, the matter was not addressed. So, of course, as this case goes before the Supreme Court next week, people on the Second Amendment team are saying, wow, wouldn't it be something if the Supreme Court said that any law that infringes on the right to bear arms must undergo strict scrutiny? And the guys on the other side are saying, no, rational basis would be plenty good enough. So anyhow, Winkler argued in a law review article that strict scrutiny shouldn't be applied to gun control laws But even if that's the legal standard adopted by judges shouldn't let that stand in the way of upholding almost every gun control law that faces a court challenge. Now, here's a quote from this guy, Winkler. The justices are considering the constitutionality of a New York law that makes it hard for residents to obtain a permit to carry concealed firearms in public. The court, with 3 conservative pro-justices appointed by former President Donald Trump, will almost certainly say New York's law is too restrictive under the Second Amendment, which will lead, predictably, to more guns on city streets and more violent crime. Now, that's where I'd stop and take issue. I don't predict that at all. If there are more people allowed to carry concealed weapons, I think it'll have a minimal effect because the people carrying the weapons on the street are quite often criminals, and they don't care about gun permits. The New York case could signal the beginning of a new era of just judicial hostility to gun laws, especially to bans on assault weapons and large-capacity magazines that the reinvigorated gun safety movement has fought so hard to get enacted. With a single decision, the Supreme Court majority could transform life in many American cities and stymie the growing political movement for gun reform. If only it were so. So the author of this article says he's not going to frisk every one of Winkler's anti-Second Amendment bloviations, but he wants to point out that almost 35 years after Florida adopted a shall issue right to carry, its violent crime and homicide rates have declined by more than 50%. In fact, violent crime steadily declined across the country from 1991 until June of 2020, even as tens of millions of Americans obtained a concealed carry license. As for the laughable idea that there's growing political movement for gun reform, the author argues it's the opposite. Recent polls have shown support for new gun controls laws down sharply compared to recent years, but more broadly, the gun control movement has steadily lost ground since its heyday in the 1970s and early 80s, when it successfully convinced lawmakers in both D.C. and Chicago to ban the possession of handguns. That was the high watermark of the gun control lobby, though you could make a case that the 1994 national ban on so-called assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that anti-gunners were able to foist on the American people with the help of, guess who? Joe Biden. What do you say to that, Jose?
Let's go, Brandon.
There you go. That was the real peak of the gun control movement. Since then, however, the movement has stalled out nationally. And even at the state level, Second Amendment advocates have been able to chalk up more wins than losses, though we've often had to fight like hell in the courts before we've been successful. Now, even anti-gun academics like Winkler are reluctantly coming to the conclusion that the Supreme Court's decision in the Bruin case, that's the New York case, could spell disaster for gun ban fans. Advocates and activists need an agenda that can survive the Supreme Court's new interpretation of the Second Amendment. That's what Winkler says. Fighting to restrict the quantity and kinds of weapons owned by citizens will be a losing battle. And then the author here says that's a hell of an admission for Winkler, and I don't expect to see the well-funded gun control organizations eagerly accept Winkler's advice, at least not publicly. Behind the scenes, however, the deep-pocketed millionaires like Michael Bloomberg and Paul Allen, who have helped keep the gun control lobby well-funded, may be more amenable to accepting what Winkler has to say, particularly since Winkler's not actually calling for a fundamental change in ideology. Now, somewhere in this article, I just can't find it right now, there's a mention that the gun control lobby has really taken a hard hit since the advent of tall tales and the respectful reading of the Second Amendment at the beginning of every show. I'm sure it's in here somewhere. I just can't find it. Okay, so much for the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution and gun control. Was that Winkler on the phone, Jose?
Kellis wanted to volunteer a walk through Chicago suburbs, the Chicago city streets, to show how safe gun control is.
Well, he's got a death wish, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's go to Zemi Ikotny. Wonder of wonders, both newspapers decided to write editorials today instead of feel-good pieces about All Souls Day. It's amazing. Okay, so we start out with the Daily News. This is going to be controversial. Lawmakers must give GPA exemption to build new PT power plant. Are you listening, Clint? Sabina? Lawmakers should approve Bill 213 by Senator Joe S. San Augustine, which would allow a new diesel-burning 41-megawatt power plant to be built next to the current oil-burning generators at Cabris Island. Now, when I read this, I've got to do a little research. The oil-burning generators are turbines, and the way a turbine works is you have the shaft with blades, well-constructed shaft with blades on it, and oil is sprayed into a combustion chamber. It's atomized, sprayed into a combustion chamber, and it ignites, and the expanding air caused by the igniting oil causes the turbine to spin. I thought these were far more modern than diesel engines, which are reciprocating engines, up and down, yeah. But it seems strange then that we're talking about putting a new 41 megawatt power plant diesel. It says diesel burning. No, maybe it's a diesel burning turbine. I don't know. Be nice if Simon called in and helped us out with that one, wouldn't it? The bill was introduced at the request of the Power Authority after contractor Korea Electric Power Corporation expressed concern that a 1993 Guam law could jeopardize financing for its power plant project. The law prohibits fuel-burning generators larger than 1 megawatt from being built within 1,500 feet of a school. The proposed KEPCO diesel plant would be about 1,200 feet from Jose Rios Middle School. San Augustine's bill would exempt the new diesel plant from the distance restriction. The plant will be located in the same area that the current Cabris power plant sit. The diesel power plant is intended to provide reserve power in connection with the 198 megawatt Ukadu power plant being built by KEPCO. It's unclear how lawmakers in 1993 rationalized that 1,500 feet is too close to a school. I suspect something along the lines of Kentucky windage. The prohibition is part of Bill 359, introduced in the 22nd legislature, which had the primary purpose of leasing government land to GPA so it could install power equipment. The idea that students at the middle school will be choking on generator fumes is ill-founded. Power plants are subject to federal environmental regulations enforced by hefty fines. Two existing fuel-burning generators, PD8 and PD9, have been operating even closer to the middle school for decades. They were built at Cabris in the late 1990s, despite the distance prohibition stated in the 1993 law. You mean we have laws on the books that aren't being enforced? I feel like Inspector Reno when he found out that gambling was going on in Casablanca.
Shocked.
I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you. The new power plants are part of GPA's plan to comply with federal clean air regulations and avoid millions of dollars in federal fines. Once operating, they will allow oil-burning Cabris 1 and Cabris 2 generators to be retired. There is no alternative site for the PD diesel plant because GPA already owns the property, which is near fuel supplies and power transmission lines. It's reasonable and good policy to allow a cleaner burning diesel plant to be built at Cabris, especially if it means GPA can finally shut down its oil-burning generators and continue to meet the island's needs. Well, I got my blue pencil here, and unless the Post comes up with something dynamic, it might be a good one for GPA, because this is what editorials are for, to explain to you what's going on, what the policy decisions are, and then to have a call of action, to urge government employees to do the right thing. Good one. Now, will this legislation be able to pass? Well, if Therese Terlahi doesn't make any floor amendments to it, it has a chance. Because you wouldn't want to mix up war reparations with diesel power plants, would you?
Or make any clerical errors.
Exactly, yeah. But I would expect firm resistance to come from Clint Rigel and Sabina Paris, our local environmental wackos, who would rather see no power plant built at all than one built within 1,200 feet of a school. Now, if there were a good reason not to build that close to a school, I might reverse myself. But I suspect there is no good reason. It's just 1,500 feet sounded like a really nice round number. Let's go with that, right? And it could very well be, and we kind of had the same controversy when the power plant was being built at Ukadu because it was too close to the hospital. So we have a real case, serious case here of NIMBY on Guam. Not in my backyard.
The whole island is our backyard.
Exactly, yeah. So we went through it with when it was time to shut down the Ordot dump with the Ukadu power plant, and I just have this premonition that we're going to go through it again with Joe's Bill 213, which looks to me like sensible legislation. And of course, Clint Rigel, if he had his way, would be a Luddite. He would get an axe and go and chop up every single power plant on the island, saying, we've got to go solar. Yeah. And I use the parallel of when we finally found that, that when we could get oil out of the ground that we could use to burn in lamps, we could make kerosene out of that oil and burn it in lamps, and we really didn't need whale oil anymore, that the oil coming out of the ground was cheaper and better. If Clint and Sabina had been around at that time, they would have said, we've got to kill all the whales. So that we go to this new oil stuff, right? So I'm going to watch this one very closely, and I would hope that common sense comes forward and prevails. Let's take a short break here, and I'll go to the Post editorial next.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Hafude, konnichiwa,
Patwa,
Ciao! Enter for a chance to win the 76 Circle K World Cuisine Giveaway. Be one of 3 lucky winners to win a passport of free food from around the world at over 15 different local restaurants. Just stop by any 76 Circle K, purchase $35 or more in fuel to get an entry form. Drive by today and taste the world with 76 Circle K's World Cuisine Giveaway. Visit 76circlekguam.com for more details. Some conditions apply. Circle K, take it easy.
And now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So going into the Post editorial, we have a couple news articles that I want to read as a foundation for my comment on the Post editorial. There's an article in Daily News, Division of Children's Wellness established in executive order. Governor Leon Guerrero established the Division of Children's Wellness within the Department of Public Health and Social Services through an executive order, according to a news release from Adelup. The new division was created because more residents are eligible for help with child care programs, and there's currently aren't enough services available according to the order. The executive order calls for the new division to begin operations on January 1, 2022. It will include the Bureau of Social Services and the new Bureau of Child Care Services. The Bureau of Child Care Services will be responsible for the administration of all federally funded child care programs and grant funds, the release stated. The new division will launch and begin managing all federal and local care programs by division start date, the release stated. The Bureau will be responsible for, 1, expanding eligibility requirements for income so that more families may qualify for child care assistance during the pandemic. 2, expanding the supply of child care services on Guam with a focus on increasing in-home and relative care child providers. The goal is to streamline and simplify the application process for license-exempt child care providers and to receive child care block grant subsidy payments. 3, develop an operating plan to release funds to support the existing child care market. The new division will collaborate with other government agencies such as the Department of Education, which oversees after-school programs, such as community learning centers and after-school program instructional remediation and enrichment. Early in our administration, we identified significant shortfalls in the resources that serve our vulnerable children and their families, Governor Leon Guerrero said. Our existing child care centers fill only 6% of our community's needs. So we have to have directed the funds and resources necessary to improve, protect, and sustain child care for all families in need. Another story ran in the Post, and there's a quote here from the governor. We urgently need to develop a comprehensive plan to manage the millions of dollars in federal grants earmarked to improve, protect, and sustain child care programs. That's from the executive order. Terry Uggan, Deputy Director of Department of Public Health and Social Services, told the Post it's a reasonable time frame to get the work done. There are quite a number of people who are knowledgeable about early childhood. I'm knowledgeable about early childhood. You know why, Jose?
You used to be an early child?
I was an early child once upon a time, yeah.
We have that in common, Bob.
Very good. Uggan said, this is a wonderful experience. It's an add-on to their resume, and it's a win-win situation because they have something to contribute. But we've already started looking at the positions and breaking them down. Just establishing the division itself is a huge step, but we are so ready to move forward. I haven't even got to the editorial yet, and my tummy feels so warm, right? I may have to take a couple of Tums here just to get my stomach under control. So my first question is this. The governor's going to establish a new government agency. By how? By executive order. Don't we ordinarily think in terms of the legislature, of statutory establishment of new government agencies? But the governor has gotten so used to doing everything by executive order that she probably has forgotten that there are such things as statutes in the legislative process. So I start out, I'm not happy about this, even if it's this money that she can spend without being fettered by legislative appropriation. We have a legislature for a reason, and it should be used as often as possible. Whereas it seems that the current administration's idea is we use the legislature only when it's absolutely necessary. So then the editorial comes along. New executive order promises much for parents and community. That's a headline. There's a new division and bureau created within the Department of Public Health and Social Services, the Division of Children's Wellness, and as a part of it, the Bureau of Child Care Services. Now, when I see the government doing stuff with children, I am immediately very cautious. Once upon a time, Hillary Clinton said, "It takes a village to raise a child." Now, I could interpret that according to my own experience, having grown up and was for all practical purposes a village where almost everybody, all the parents, all of the adults knew almost all the kids and knew who they belonged to. So if a kid was doing something dangerous like grabbing onto the rear bumper of an automobile during the wintertime and sliding down the road because the road was icy, would you believe I used to do that, Jose?
You were an early child.
I was not every child. But if a kid were doing that, you could bet that his parents would get a phone call from somebody. "Hey, you know what Bobby's doing? He and Danny Harkness are standing out there in the corner by the bowling alley, and when cars go by, they grab a hold of it." Yeah. All right, thank you very much for calling. Nowadays, you know, if someone called a parent and told them that, the parent would be extremely angry. That's my child. It's none of your business what he's doing. What kind of car was it? It wasn't a Cadillac? Okay, I'll take care of it. Yeah. So, you know, and when kids were doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, it really did take a village, because everybody in the town kind of felt responsible for every kid in town. But it was a nice thing. And it was obviously completely voluntary. The government had nothing to do with it. But the Hillary Clinton idea of it takes a village to raise a child is, well, first of all, we have to have Child Care Center number 942, and then Preschool Academy number 1420, and so on. In other words, the village would be all these government agencies. Whereas you and I, Jose, start out with the proposition that the people most able to raise children are the kids' parents. That's the way it used to be, and that's the way...
That's a novel idea.
Yeah, it is, and the ideas that have replaced it are not working at all. You know, we now have the two extremes. We have the helicopter parent and the extremely neglectful parent. The parents that don't give a darn what their kids do, so long as they don't bother the parents. You turn the kids loose, kind of like you turn cattle loose on the open range at the beginning of the summer, right? Or we have the helicopter parent, so that no child ever goes through an entire day without being supervised by an adult all the time. But when I see something called the Bureau of Child Care Services, it causes me to be suspicious. The cost of the new division and the new bureau isn't clear from Executive Order 2021-26, which the governor signed on October 29. Will DPHSS need to hire new people? You can bet on that one. How many, and will they be permanent or limited term? Well, of course they'll be permanent. How else are you going to get them to vote for you? The new Bureau is tasked with, among other things, creating and implementing a plan by January, so it won't be long until those questions are answered. There looks to be about $100 million in federal funds available to help stand up these new sections and fulfill the overall mission of ensuring child wellness. We hope, and I have to stop here. You know, once again, I've got my trusty Constitution with me. I look at Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Congress, dealing with the Congress, and it says the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, etc. And then there's a list of 17 things that the Congress can do: borrow money on the credit of the United States, regulate commerce, establish a uniform rule. I don't see anything in there at all about taking care of children. Nowhere. And I don't see it in the Organic Act, except for the fact that we have to have a school system. So what is the federal government, the national government, peeling off all of this money for something that really isn't a federal government mandate? Anyhow, it's $100 million, and I suppose the old saying applies here: never look a gift horse in the mouth. We hope that whatever the plan is put together will focus resources on children and support the island's existing child care industry, and be mindful of growing DPHSS to proportions that local taxpayers won't be able to afford in 2 years when the federal COVID-19 money dries up. That's a very substantial fear. And we have seen before where we get a little bit of seed money, we set these things up, and then we can't afford them. But of course, you can never close down a government agency. So what happens is that we just water down the efforts of every government agency to support the one that doesn't have the proper funding. The executive order notes that Guam's current child care capacity falls short of what families need, with existing child care center capacity filling only 6% of our community needs. I didn't understand that when I read it in the news story. I don't understand it when I read it in the editorial. When they say child care center, are they talking about daycare centers?
Have to.
So if they're talking about daycare centers, and if you're saying there are only enough space in daycare centers to take care of 6% of community needs, what happens to the other 94% of the kids? You just tie them up to a tree or something like that? Turn them loose on the street?
Zombies.
Yeah. The executive order also acknowledges the fragile state of the child care industry and its need for funding. We urgently need to develop a comprehensive plan to manage millions of dollars in federal grant funds earmarked to improve, protect, and sustain child care programs in Guam, the order states. This comprehensive plan will emphasize expanding child care eligibility and increasing child care supply so that more families may return to work, pursue higher education, or receive training in pursuit of gainful employment instead of taking care of their kids. According to the executive order, Guam secured $96 million in one-time supplemental federal funding under the CARES Act and Corona Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act and the American Rescue Plan Act. This one-time supplemental funding is available to help improve, expand, and sustain much-needed child care programs in Guam, the order states. The executive order also provides DPHSS with an additional $250,000 to address the continuing emergency at Child Protective Services, which is still being overseen by the Department of Youth Affairs. In addition, the Department of Administration is tasked to develop a differential and premium incentive pay policy for employees of DYA and DPHSS whose primary focus is child welfare services. Why? Such compensation policy shall allow for such positions to accrue overtime. Well, if they're classified positions, they do accrue overtime. Hazardous. Now, what's hazardous about working with kids? And night differential under appropriate circumstances, and recognize the specialized and critical nature of these positions. In other words, it's another political maneuver to develop some loyalty in people who make more money because of the governor's executive order. DPHSS already receives about $10 million a year for the Child Care Development Block Grant Program. This program helps qualifying parents pay for child care so they continue their education, attend job training, or continuing working. The new Bureau is also tasked with expanding eligibility requirements for the block grant so that more Guam families may qualify for child care assistance. Even more exciting, however, is the focus on increasing in-home and relative child care providers. In Guam, many local families rely on an aunt or grandmother to take care of the kids. Expanding the program to allow more parents to have trusted family members care for children, whether they're working the day or night shift, at a home where the risk of exposure to COVID-19 is minimized, will be a great help to many families. Now, I don't understand this, but I suspect what they're talking about is a program that would pay auntie to take care of the niece, or grandpa, pay grandpa to take care of the grandson. That's the way I read this. These are good ideas, and we look forward to seeing the plan and its implementation. If it's done well, it really will help families. It will put extra money, yeah, here we go. It will put extra money in grandma's bank account. So you got to pay a grandma to take care of her grandchild now. That's where we are. And will help boost the fragile child care industry in Guam. Our fingers are crossed. Let's take a short break. I got a few things to say about this whole mess here.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tuman location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Yeah, okay, so we got about 8 more minutes here before the big halftime show. This whole thing is troubling. I'm going to introduce a word here, a phrase that, of course, didn't appear in the editorial, and I suppose some people will be offended when I say, what about self-reliance? Are we at the point now where if the government doesn't give you money, we're just not capable of doing anything? That the responsibility for a family doesn't go to the mother and father. Obviously, the government's got to pay for it. Government's got to pay grandpa to take care of his grandson. And oh, this is wonderful. We can establish a new government agency. We can increase the amount of child care facilities, on and on and on. I wonder if it'll take us longer to recover from the infusion of ex gratia cash into our economy than it takes us to recover from the virus, because we're in the process of developing some really, really bad habits. We have an emergency in the government, so unless we tell you to come into work, you stay home. But don't worry, we're going to keep paying you. And if you do come in, then we'll not only pay your regular pay, we'll pay you anywhere from 10 to 25% more. And we're going to get the national government to give us $2 billion, and we'll use that to, so the grandpa can be paid to take care of his grandson, and on and on and on and on. And we've seen how this worked before with Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Lyndon Johnson came up with the aid for dependent children, welfare, that provided that any home for which there was no wage earner, no father, would be given so much money per child in the family. Well, as I've said before, if you want more of something, subsidize it. So we have poor people that are raising flocks of children in order to reap that welfare harvest. And we've gone to the point now where in some communities more than 70% of the children are raised in fatherless homes because this do-gooder instinct. Intentionally took fathers out of the process, much to the detriment of society. Well, let's see who I got. It's probably our Carl wanting to chime in here. No, it's Phil Flores. All right. Good afternoon, Phil.
Okay, I just wanted to say I got in my car, turned on the radio, and you're back.
I am back.
And don't take such long vacations. We miss you. Like the weekends are bad enough. But anyway, welcome back, and you're sounding great, and I really enjoy hearing your point of view. I think, though, that your buddy from Wisconsin who grabbed the bumpers with you, if he finds out that you told on him, he's going to go to his parents, assuming they're still alive, and go, Bob was just kidding. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, welcome home, welcome back, and it's great to hear your voice.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much. Thanks for your sponsorship. Tall Tales rules, right?
And I told you, I've got a Let's Go Ronald or Arnold, whatever it is, a shirt that Cos made me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you should get some Tall Tale shirts made because logo wear. I think people will put them on and wear them at Payless and elsewhere. And I'd buy one.
Well, that's a good incentive. I'll try to work with Kaz on that. See if we can develop some merch for Tall Tales, right?
I think it'd be fun. Right in time for seasonal sales, and I'm sending something to my cousin in Wyoming or Texas, whatever, and they go, "What's this?" And you go, "Well, you got to listen to the point."
There you go. Well, thanks for your advice, Phil, and good talking to you again.
And good talking to you, my friend. Take care.
So long. Yeah. Now, as far as me ratting out Dan Harkness, a kid that used to grab the bumpers with me, when you're a kid, this is a possibly dangerous undertaking because your parents might find out and you might get punished for it. But when you're not a kid anymore, when you're up in your 80s, then it's a matter of bragging rights. This is what I used to do when I was a kid.
That's what you went to Wisconsin for?
Right. Okay, I got another Joe on the line. Maybe I'll hang on to another Joe until after the halftime show, huh? All right, and after the halftime show, I'm going to do the Blue Star presentation, and then we'll get into the card. And the card today consists of... I printed the wrong card. It's okay. We've got... uh-oh. Don't tell me I didn't bring the card materials along.
You want me to read the one that was sent?
Yeah, would you please?
We have Therese versus Therese. That would be the speaker. And Shelton versus the people.
Yeah, good. Okay, I got some work cut out for me here during the halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Republicans take Virginia. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Political newcomer Glenn Youngkin has won the governor's race in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Beating former Democrat Governor Terry McAuliffe, Youngkin telling supporters he has big plans.
Dreams and hopes for a Virginia that soars, a Virginia that never settles, a Virginia where the Virginia promise comes alive for everyone that calls this Virginia home.
Youngkin taking 51% of the votes cast in a state that President Biden won by 10 points just a year ago. Despite the president, Vice President Harris, and former President Obama all making campaign appearances for Terry McAuliffe. Former President Trump releasing a statement saying it was his base turning out for Youngkin that led to the victory. The governor's race in New Jersey too close to call, with 88% of the vote tallied. Republican businessman Jack Ciattarelli, who is leading incumbent Republican Governor Phil Murphy by 1/10 of a percentage point, telling supporters,
I wanted to come out here tonight because I had prepared one hell of a victory speech. I wanted to come out here tonight and tell you that we had won. I'm here to tell you that we're winning. We're winning.
Governor Murphy trying to become the state's first Democrat governor to be reelected since 1977, saying,
We're going to have to wait a little while longer than we had hoped. We're going to wait for every vote to be counted.
Voters in Minneapolis have overwhelmingly defeated an effort to replace the city's police department with a less forceful Department of Public Safety.
Minneapolis became ground zero for the defund movement after the death of George Floyd, and activists believed if they could win here, it would set the stage for them to dismantle other police departments in cities across the country.
Fox's Garrett Tenney, and while you were watching the elections, the World Series ended with the Braves beating the Astros 7-0 in Game 6. America is listening to Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
President Biden has returned to the White House from his European trip, which included the G20 summit meeting in Rome and the UN's climate conference in Scotland. He had hoped to have his social spending plan approved before the trip, but as he returns to Washington, it's still not done.
Two senators are in play here, Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. That's why there's been an agreement with the blessing of Sinema on a plan to lower the cost of medicine under Medicare. That makes the bill more expensive. It shifts the bill to the left and slightly isolates Manchin. The GOP is rooting for Manchin and Sinema to make mischief. There's worry that efforts by Manchin and Sinema could blow up the social spending bill and the infrastructure bill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced a general timetable for the social spending bill. He says the Senate will scrub the bill next week. That's important to comply with Senate budget rules. And then Schumer wants the Senate to start debate on the bill the week of November 15th.
Fox's Chad Pergram at the Capitol. The Centers for Disease Control approving using a lower dose of the Pfizer vaccine to inoculate children as young as 5 against the coronavirus. The Supreme Court hears a challenge today to restrictive gun permits in New York that limit many permit holders to have guns only at home and not to carry them. Striking UAW members have said no to a new contract offer from John Deere.
The latest agreement John Deere had reached with United Auto Workers negotiators wasn't good enough for the rank and file. It would have given them a 10% raise and an $8,500 ratification bonus. The union said 55% of its members at 12 plants in Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas voted against the latest contract offer Tuesday. Some said the offer didn't give enough to lower paid workers. They're hoping for a better deal as the company's predicting record profits for the year. The strike's been going on since October 14th. Jill Nato, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Fuel up today with the new $8 gasolina meal. 2 all-beef Nathan's hot dogs, a big bag of chips, regular size M&Ms, and a 16-ounce gasolina energy drink. A brand new drink in a black can that brings a burst of energy. Drive in now and fire up your day with the $8 gasolina meal. Promo is only available at your favorite Circle K Guam locations while supplies last. Circle K, take it easy.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile Team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck. 0 down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at GuamAutospot.com.
Okay, so here we are, that big halftime show that we've all come to love so much. Just concluded, so we're going to proceed into the second half of Tall Tales. The first thing I'm going to do here in the second half of Tall Tales is award the Blue Star. I just have so many misgivings about the Post's editorial here. Because the Post is looking at this idea here of, oh boy, we're getting all this free money, and therefore we can build a bigger government and a more intrusive government than the one we have right now. And isn't this wonderful? And at the end of the editorial, we got this statement: "Our fingers are crossed." Yeah, no, I know I'm going to be out of step with a lot of folks out there in the international radio listening audience. I don't like to see the government get involved with families unless it's absolutely necessary. You've heard me say this a million times. What I want to see is an effective, efficient government operating within the rule of law that provides basic government services on at least a break-even basis. Now, creating this new child, what's it called? Division of Children's Wellness by executive order. It just doesn't sit well with my idea of what the government ought to do. The government should only be doing things that people and as individuals are not able to do. You know, it'd be pretty hard to have a road system if everyone were responsible for building the road out in front of his own house. That wouldn't work very well. So having the government build roads, fine. But when it comes to raising children, that's best done by the family. So no blue star for the Post, that's for sure. Now, the Daily News, on the other hand, has put their finger on an important problem. They've described the problem quite adequately. They've criticized the legislature a little bit, which is always good editorial policy. And then they've provided a solution and a call to action. So today, the Pacific Daily News gets a blue star. Congratulations, Daily News. Okay, so whatever happened to Another Joe?
He went to another hour.
He went to another hour.
Call back, Joe.
Okay, so I have two items on the card here that I'm kind of going to treat together. I've got Therese versus Therese, and then I've got Shelton versus the people. And to do Therese versus Therese, unfortunately, I printed out the section of the public law that I need, but I didn't bring it with me. So let me find it here online. I'm thumbing through the statute here. Every one of the 15 members of the 13th Guam legislature, these were the 13th Guam legislature, 36th Guam legislature signed on as co-sponsors to Bill 130. Bill 130, an article to add a new article, etc., blah, 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 relative to establishing the Guam World War II Reconciliation Act of 2021 to compensate claims of the greatest generation of Guam for the atrocities suffered during the World War II occupation of Guam. And there's the obligatory long statement of legislative intent. And I'm still looking here for the magic words that snuck in there. Having a little difficulty finding what I'm looking for here. Well, I just have to proceed based on my memory. So we start out here with the Therese versus Therese, and that is that when public law, as you were, when Bill 130-36 passed, it was when it was on the floor, Therese made an amendment. Therese Terlahi made an amendment to the bill. Now the bill started out to pay war reparations to the 700 people who were eligible under the Federal War Reparations Act, but had, for one reason or another, not filed a claim. There was a one-year period in which to file a claim. When the 1 year was up, if you hadn't filed a claim, you snooze, you lose. And people who filed got checks in the amount of $10,000, $12,000, or $25,000. So the original intent then of this public law, this bill, was to pay those 700 people with what amounted to local funds, Section 30 funds, whatever. But when the bill was on the floor, Therese Terlahi made an amendment that the war reparations should be paid to anyone who suffered through the Japanese occupation, regardless of when he or she died. And that amendment failed. But in the legislative process, here's how it works. There is a three-reading process. First reading, once upon a time during first reading, the clerk at the beginning of, or at the appropriate part of the legislature, would read the title of every bill that had been introduced. That was the first reading. The second reading would occur when the bill came up on the legislative agenda. And the speaker would announce, we are now going to discuss Bill 130-36. And as soon as the speaker made that announcement, a member would stand up, usually the majority leader, and say, I move that Bill 130-36 be placed on be moved to the third reading file. And the debate that occurred following that motion was actually debate on that motion. And at the conclusion of the debate, a vote would be taken, and if a majority of the members voted aye, then the bill would go to the third reading. The third reading is when voting occurs. Now, a bill is introduced at the first reading, and during the discussion on the motion to move it to third reading, members make amendments to the bill. So a member would stand up, say, Madam Speaker, I move to amend the bill to read blah, blah, blah. He would turn in a written version of his amendment. The matter would be debated. Sometimes the amendment would be amended, and there would be a vote. If the amendment passed, then that particular amendment would be kept together with the bill as introduced. If the amendment failed, it's disregarded. When the bill when the motion to move the bill to third reading passes, then what is called engrossment takes place. And engrossment means this: the clerk of the legislature and council sit down with the bill as introduced, all of the amendments that actually passed, and the amendments are inserted into the bill in the appropriate place. As an example, Section 3 of the bill says hot and cold. The amendment says, an amendment is passed, it said, change the order of that. So instead of hot and cold, it should read cold and hot. So that amendment then is incorporated into the body of the bill. It's a whole lot easier now with word processing and computers than it used to be once upon a time when all of this stuff was done with typewriters. So when all of the amendments then are properly placed in the bill as moved to third reading, it is said that the bill is engrossed. Occasionally, a bill can go to the third reading without engrossment. If the bill that passes is the bill as introduced with no amendments, quite often it'll go to third reading without engrossment. But Bill 130 was engrossed, and in the process of engrossing the bill, an amendment that did not pass was included in the text of the bill. And I don't know why I can't find it here in my online copy.
Can I ask for clarification on something? And I don't know how much this makes a difference.
Yeah.
From my understanding, the amendment wasn't even discussed because it was considered to be not germane. So it wasn't a pass-fail. It just wasn't.
That's a very important point. You're absolutely right, Jose. So
that's what makes it suspect.
Yeah. So when the amendment was proffered by Speaker Terlahi, the committee chair or the chairman of the committee on the whole said that bill that amendment is not germane to this bill. It takes the bill to new territory. If you want to do that, it should be a separate bill. We're not going to entertain any debate on that. Yeah. But somehow, even though that amendment was not debated, it somehow wound up in the engrossed bill. And the engrossed bill then went to third reading. Third reading is where the roll is called. And members vote aye or nay, unless they want to be quarterbacks in which they play the passing game. Yeah. And the bill passed unanimously with the Therese Terlahi putative amendment included, even though it had not even been discussed by the House, certainly not adopted by the House. So once the engrossed bill passes, it is sent to the Speaker for signature and to the Secretary for attestation. And then it becomes the enrolled bill. It's called enrollment. And the enrolled bill then is transmitted to the governor, who has 10 days, Sundays accepted, to approve the bill, veto the bill, or allow it to become law without her signature, except at the end of a legislative session, which we needn't get into. So the governor signed it. Now, the governor's signing statement says, unfortunately, despite significant efforts by Guam's previous congressional delegates to secure federal commitment to reparations for Guam survivors of Japan's occupation during World War II, the endeavor stalled on a technical deficiency. As congressional efforts to correct the law in the United States Public Law 114-328 proceeded, we realized that too many of our greatest generation were leaving this life without ever receiving reparations they had been promised. Early in 2020, my administration delivered on those promises by advancing payments. Yeah, of course. While thousands of claims were satisfied, it became clear that several hundred of survivors had failed to secure entitlement to reparations, not because their claims for pain and suffering had been deemed insignificant, but because they had missed the federal statutory deadline. Bill 130 seeks to correct the injustice by establishing a local program similar to federal one, except without a filing deadline. Bill 130-36 is Public Law 36-59. Now let me take one more glance through this bill here. The first section is legislative findings, talks about the Hopkins report, etc. The second section, implementation, calls for the governor to submit to the speaker an implementation plan which will include a proposed funding source for the payments. Then we have the adjudication committee established, which will consist of 5 members, the executive director of the Commission on Decolonization. How does this have anything to do with decolonization? And then just to show you how woke the governor is, the executive director of the Commission on Decolonization, or their designee. Now, I think at the time that this was signed, the director was a male. And I suspect that he will probably be a male for the foreseeable future. Disappointing when we see public officials get into this nonsense. Next section, 13204, consistency with established guidelines. Commission shall adjudicate all claims, etc. And then there's a reporting requirement. The report to the Director of Administration shall submit a report. Authorization to deposit funds. And I don't find the language in there that says regardless of when the claimant died. And I saw it just before the show because I printed it up. Strange thing. Are you looking at that public law, Jose?
Yeah, I'm searching that too.
So that's what I'm going to label as a conundrum. So anyhow, that's what the controversy was all about. Therese Terlahi then said, came forward and said, there was a screw up here. I'll take some responsibility, etc. Fingers were pointed at Legislative Counsel Anna Wanpat and at the clerk of the legislature, Renee Meno. There was a flap because the speaker wanted to have a closed-door meeting to explain what had happened and what was going to be done about it. Fortunately, the minority members, I think, learned a lesson about closed-door meetings and declined to participate in any closed-door meetings, actually walked out to force the discussion to be held in open session of the legislature, which has not yet occurred. So Terlise's fix to the legislature, to the flawed legislature, was to introduce the same bill that she had introduced as Bill Bill 130. And her rationale was that if I introduce Bill 130, a bill identical to Bill 130 again, there needn't be a public hearing, because the rules say that if a bill is identical to one that has already had a public hearing isn't necessary. Well, this sounds just a little bit too clever to me, because what really needs to be done is you take the public law 36-59 and amend it by striking out the offensive language. That's all you need to do. But that's not what Therese did, kind of like she's trying to game the system so that no public hearing has to be had. 13202, huh?
It's like saying it's an error, but kind of really not really.
Okay, I'm looking at 13202. Oh, yeah. No wonder I couldn't see it. Okay. Just to make it clear, the bill that passed, the bill that is law right now says this. notwithstanding any other provision of law, within 30 days of the enactment of the Guam Reconciliation Act, the governor shall submit to the legislature an implementation plan which will include proposed funding sources for the payment of war claims under Public Law 114-328 to claimants regardless of the date of death who failed to meet 1 year filing deadline under Section 1705. That's the offending section. Yeah, no wonder I couldn't find it. It's buried in the middle there. I thought it was at the end of a section. So, you know, the way this reads, shall pay to claimants regardless of the date of death who failed to meet the 1 year filing deadline of the federal program, which means that there still could be people that are not going to get it. Let's say that Mr. X was born on July 20, 1944, the end of the Japanese occupation, right? And he's still alive because he'd only be 77, right? But he missed the deadline. But since the statute says payment of war claims to claimants regardless of the date of death who failed to meet the 1 year filing deadline. Well, he hasn't died, so there is no date of death. So there's still going to be people.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So the definition is they've had to have died,
yeah,
regardless of their date.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're not dead and you miss a deadline, too bad. If you are dead and you miss a deadline, you won't know it anyhow, right? So this is really not very good draftsmanship. So then Teresa's fix is to reintroduce the bill that she introduced in the first place, when really all she needs to do is work on that one little bit of language, which would say, upon submission of the Magalahi's implementation plan, the legislature may adopt, reject, or amend the plan, etc. Wait a minute here. The offending language. Payment of war claims under U.S. Public Law 114-328 to claimants regardless of date of death, just to claimants who miss the deadline, right? That's all in just a few words. But then you'd have to have a public hearing. And of course, if you had a public hearing, you can pretty well predict what's going to happen. You'll have a lot of angry people coming down there and saying, you know, my grandpa died in 1944, and he'll never get any war claims, so, you know, you should include the estate or the heirs of those people who died. There's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of people who are extremely critical of the legislature because of the mistake, etc. It's going to be a pretty hotly contested public hearing. So I can see why Therese wanted to finesse the way around it by introducing the same bill that she introduced, I suppose with the understanding that, well, once we get it on the floor, then we can fix it. We don't have to do it in the beginning. Now, to further complicate this story, as though it weren't complicated enough already, after the mistake was discovered, Therese began by acting responsibly, by saying, yeah, I should have caught it. I'll take the blame. We screwed up. I've found out how it happened, and we've taken steps to see that it doesn't happen again. But then later on, she said, but, what we really ought to do is pay everybody regardless of when they died. Right, Jose? Isn't that what she said?
Exactly what happened, which is why I think they went into recess until today. Because the sentiment was we should introduce the bill as it was supposed to, but then there was a little bit of an addendum to say that this is how I really feel. So it kind of interjected a debate.
Yeah.
Instead of a resolution.
So here's the right thing to do, but here's what I really want to do. And then Senator Frank Blas took issue to that, didn't he?
Well, he wanted to see the written statement because it was a read statement, and that wasn't provided or wasn't able to be provided for some reason. They said they needed to transcribe what just happened, and they won't be able to provide that till today.
A written statement from the speaker to
Senator Perez read a written statement from the speaker because she's ill. She's at home recovering from Wuhan from the COVID virus.
So the statement that Paris read was not made available to Senator Blas, who asked for it.
Only to his ears. Yes, and they went into recess to obtain that statement and was told it was not available because, from what I understand, it was from a personal email, perhaps, or maybe a text, or I'm not exactly sure. But she read it from somewhere. I don't think it was from memory.
I see. Okay, so, and did that statement that was read, did it include, and this is what I really want to do?
It included sentiment, which is why Senator Blas wanted to further inquire what's going on here.
Yeah. So let's see if we can take Sherlock Holmes off the Silver Blazed case. Okay. So we have a bill that's introduced that's limited to 700 people, $10 million. When the bill is debated on the floor, Speaker Terlahi proffers an amendment to pay everyone whether they submitted their complaint, who didn't submit a claim on time, even if they died a long time ago. That's basically what happened, right? So since they died, any payment wouldn't go to them, it would go to their heirs, their intestate heirs, if no one else. So her amendment is not entertained because it's not germane. The bill is then engrossed, and in the engrossment process, Speaker Terlahi's proffered non-germane amendment somehow sneaks into the bill. The bill is then engrossed and is presented to the Speaker for signature, the enrollment process. She then signs it. When this is discovered after the governor signs it into law, she then says, well, yeah, this was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened, et cetera, et cetera. But, really, that's what we should be doing.
Exactly, yeah.
Does her confession of how she really feels about it, does this relate back to the mistake and give us something else to consider?
It doesn't give me much confidence that it was a slip. It seems a little intentional. It seems.
Yeah. Well, certainly one could make that argument. Yeah. There are enough facts there to support the argument. I suppose only a few people know exactly what happened. And, of course, Therese didn't want to talk about that publicly either, did she? She wanted to do that.
She had a proxy.
Yeah, she wanted to do that behind closed doors.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Hence the walkout.
Yeah. And good for the minority, finally acting like a minority. So now, by way of background, at the
just giving you a marker.
Okay. By way of background here, the Japanese bombed Guam on December 8th, which was the same day as they bombed Pearl Harbor, December 7th, other side of the date line. On December 10th, Japanese forces from the Marianas, Northern Marianas, invaded Guam with only token resistance by any forces on Guam. The United States had obviously decided long ago, in fact, it entered into a treaty not to fortify Guam. So there was no resistance. The Japanese occupation of Guam was very hard on the people of Guam, on all of them. And when the United States, when Japan finally surrendered on July 15 on this side of the date line, of course, there had been no peace treaty negotiated at that time. A formal surrender was entered into on September 2nd on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. And I think it took until 1955 before the United States finally signed a peace treaty with Japan. And in that peace treaty, the United States did not make any claims against the Japanese state for any wrongdoing during its occupation of Guam or any place else, as far as I know. So that used to be kind of the part and parcel of winning a war. You won the war and you got reparations from the losing side. I think history taught a really hard lesson at the end of World War I, how that worked out, because the French especially, but all of the Allies except the United States, wanted to squeeze blood out of the Japanese stone. I mean, out of the German stone. They got huge reparations awards against Germany, which Germany couldn't pay. And to make a long story short, probably that draconian feature in the peace treaty that settled World War I had a lot to do with the rise of Adolf Hitler. So I think there perhaps was the thinking, we don't want to make that same mistake twice. Now, in insurance law, if you take over somebody else's claim, there's the doctrine of subrogation, and you are subrogated to that debt yourself. But that wouldn't be a part of this. So the United States, not having pursued Japan for any injuries to the people of Guam during the occupation, had no legal obligation to pay people of Guam anything. At the end after the occupation, there was a federal statute passed called the Meritorious Claims Act, which allowed people on Guam to file claims against the United States government for various kinds of damages that they'd suffered during the war. It was a really hard time for people to get their stuff together to file any kind of claim at all. You know, people were still really struggling just to get along. And the so-called Hopkins Report, which is touched in the findings of fact in Bill 130, was very critical of the Meritorious Claims Act. So the thinking was that since the United States didn't prosecute any claims against Japan on behalf of the people of Guam, that the United States should pay war claims to the people of Guam who suffered the Japanese occupation. And there several bills were introduced into the House of Representatives. They never went anywhere, or even if they passed, they wouldn't pass the Senate, until Madeline Bordallo got it through the House and was offered a deal by none other than Senator John McCain. And Senator John McCain said that he would sponsor legislation in the Senate to pay the war claims that the people of Guam had been in search of, but the war claims would only be paid to those who actually suffered damages during the war. In other words, it would only be payable to those who survived and were still alive, not to their heirs. Madeline could have taken that deal then. If she had, the same war claims that were finally paid out would have been paid out, but they would have been paid out as somebody else's money. As it was, Madeline manipulated the situation so our war claims are paid for from Section 30 funds, from money that we could use for something else. So, you know, we took the money out of one pocket and put it in the other pocket. Madeline's excuse was, well, I have to go back and consult with my constituents to see what they want to do. An extremely bad decision, and it may very well be the reason that Michael St. Nicholas is in Washington right now. So there's still this feeling that because of the facts that I related, for those claimants who didn't survive until, I think you had to be alive on the beginning, sometime in September of 2017 to be eligible for the war claims. If you died before that, if you died in 1945 or 50, whatever, no eligibility. If you're alive at that time, you're eligible for the claims. If you made your claim and died, or if you died during the claims period, a claim could still be perfected by your estate. If you died before that, no payment. So there's still a strong feeling that, as evidenced by Therese Terlahi, that those war claims should be paid. And that, of course, you can't pay a dead man, so the heirs should be paid. Now I'm going to go to Churchill Downs, and I'll come back and we'll wrap this up for today. And let's see.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tuman location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Half a day. Konnichiwa.
Patois. Ciao. Enter for a chance to win the 76 Circle K World Cuisine Giveaway. Be one of 3 lucky winners to win a passport of free food from around the world at over 15 different local restaurants. Just stop by any 76 Circle K, purchase $35 or more in fuel to get an entry form. Drive by today and taste the world with 76 Circle K's World Cuisine Giveaway. Visit 76circlekguam.com for more details. Some conditions apply. Circle K, take it easy.
So I've got Dr. Ron McNitch on the line here. Ron, just hang on for a second. I got a couple more comments to make here. As I laid out the facts here of, the suffering, the United States not pursuing any claim against Japan, the fact that the United States didn't pursue a claim against Japan, gives rise to an argument that the United States should pay for the damage that the Japanese caused. Now, I remember Robert Underwood talking about trying to convince members of Congress that this was a worthwhile expenditure on the part of the Congress. And first of all, Robert said, not very many veterans in Congress anymore, not very many veterans in the U.S. anymore. One. Two, to convince the Congress that the Congress should appropriate money for a harm committed by the Japanese. And that made a certain amount of sense. But I understand the logic that having not pursued the claim, then the United States should pay the claim. But if the claims are going to be paid, logically, wouldn't you pay it to the person who did the suffering? One would think so. Yeah.
That's the conundrum I had. But I mean, this is different from an investment in a company or something, or even a will or something where you give something to the heirs. This is something that's a direct compensation. I don't know.
An ex gratia payment.
There you go, ex gratia payment.
Yeah. So let's say that let's say that you're talking about a great-grandfather that died during the war, you know, and let's say we're 4 generations downstream from that now. And let's say that it's a $25,000 reward because it was killed by the Japanese. This gets kind of morbid. So we're 4 generations downstream now, and there are 30 different potential heirs. So we divide the $25,000 into 30 parts. This is logical, sensible, justice, fair. It just doesn't strike me as being that at all.
I'm going to pull out it's a good campaign promise.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and I wonder if that's what motivated Madeline when she said, well, I got to go home and check with my constituents. Because if you're only going to pay the war claims to those people who suffered and were still alive, it's a relatively small number. If you expand it to the heirs, you know, you're talking about probably the difference between 6,000 or 7,000 votes and 40,000 votes. So, so that's where we are. Now, I want to spend a little more time on this, but I'll go to Senator Shelton's plan. But I think Ron has been rather patient here to wait this long. So we'll put Ron on, and he can tell us everything we wanted to know about war claims. Right, Ron?
Not quite, sir, but Hapaday Senator, Hapaday Guam. Yeah, you missed all of the drama back when this came up, you know, a while back when they had the bill error and things like that. And you know, it was quite a tumultuous kind of a week we had then over the I guess they misstated on the bill. They had language in the bill that was passed into law, and it created this. It should have been an easy to resolve, hey, we made a mistake and rescind it kind of issue, and it dragged out like crazy. But I was just going to mention something related to World War II and the end of World War II. The end of World War II, the Soviet Union was totally concentrated on Europe and not on the Japan side of the war. They were allied with the United States, but they didn't carry any of the burden of prosecuting the war against the Japanese, and it was pretty much the Brits and also along with the United States that really pushed for resolving it. China under Chiang Kai-shek at the Yalta Conference had asked that Taiwan be returned from the Japanese control. It was a Japanese colony at the time, back to China, and that's eventually how nationalist China ended up taking over Taiwan. I think that in general, though, the Soviet Union, they wanted Sakhalin Island after the end of World War II. I think the Soviets were surprised that Japan had been totally, rolled up as quickly as it had. And because of that, the United States had near total domination of all things Japanese. And that is, for example, Okinawa was taken. Okinawa actually, all the way up until the early 1970s, was virtually just like Guam. It was practically a U.S. territory at that time.
It was occupied.
And, right.
Yeah.
It was fully under the control of the United States, and as part of the Nixon shocks, it was returned to Japan as a concession over the Nixon shocks, which involved soybean and things like that. But I think what I was going to just briefly mention is the war reparations part, and you're absolutely right that there was this huge issue following World War I. Is what made World War I happen. It was simply the Allies in World War I really raked Germany, particularly over the coals, and that caused a lot of the nationalism in Germany that later turned into Nazism. But regarding war reparations, I think part of Madeline Bordallo's mistake was she had bad advice. I think that, if I recall, apparently she was advised that she needed to do full consultation. Instead of taking the deal from McCain, she was advised very strongly that she should take take the issue back, and by then the deal window had passed. But I do agree that it's very problematic to give second, third, or even fourth generation heirs reparations for things that happened in the distant past. That's a very problematic policy, and I can't think of any example. We have a specific constitutional ban on something we call the corruption of blood, and that is we're not responsible for the transgressions of our family members before us. Well, sometimes there's I would believe a related concept that's probably never used related to the same element where people are benefiting from something that ancestrally happened that had never really affected them at all. I think that's a very a policy that really needs to be given a lot more thought than I think is currently being given in terms of whether it's something we should do or not.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Ron. On the corruption of blood angle, that's Article 3, Section 3, Paragraph 1, Paragraph 2. And it reads, the Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted.
Right.
Yeah. So you're talking about not a corruption of blood, but an enhancement of blood, right?
Right. Exactly. An exact opposite effect based on basically a kind of a kinship-based reasoning. Which, I mean, there are other claims in the United States that are commonly made. There are ones that are commonly attributed to, like the phrase 40 acres and a mule. And that is everyone who was a descendant of a freed slave deserves compensation given based on a supposed promise that was given following the Civil War. And even today, there are people who try to argue forcefully that should apply to large groups of folks in the United States, and it's never been given any strong consideration, at least to date, in the United States.
Well, thanks for chiming in on that one, Ron. I think you and I are pretty much on the same page on this one.
It's great to have you back in town, sir.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so I look again to see who's in the green room, and I see Drive-Through Jack, who wants to talk about reparations. And I see another Joe going backwards to Division of Children Wellness. I think probably it makes more sense to go with Drive-Through Jack here, don't you, Jose? Another Joe, you're probably going to have to call tomorrow. Talk about children wellness. Go for it, Drive-Through Jack. You got about 3 minutes.
Yeah, being a conservative since I was in the womb, I can tell you that the main reason is that the word reparations left a bad connotation to every conservative, every Republican in the 90s and the 80s, because when you brought up the word reparations, that meant you also had to talk about slavery and reparation for slavery. And that was a no from the get-go, like Chief, what's his name, always says.
Yeah.
And to correct Ron, what the trend happened is when 9/11 happened, and they started, things for survivors of those we lost on 9/11. I have no problem with that. I mean, I really don't. We're the richest country at the time. We are most of the compassionate country at the time. I have no problem, but that opened a whole door to people seeking compensation. And I'd like to take a salute to the late Senator Inouye. As you well know, he was also in the U.S. military, and it was his group, the surviving American Japanese who served in the war. They led to the statehood of Hawaii. And yeah, there's a lot of bad things that happen. There's a lot of people that are looking for compensation. Let's not forget the rape of Nanking. Let's not forget what Australia went through during World War II. There's a lot of people out there, the Koreans, the comfort women. There's too many people to mention. There's no justice in war. There's just survivors. And yeah, I agree that we need to move most of that money, whatever money that came through, should have went to just the people of Guam, set up a memorial for the site. It shouldn't have been done to individuals. And if there was individuals, it should have been done to survivors, because there's no way my grandfather could have gotten it, who died in 1955. There's no way my grandmother could have gotten it, who died in 1970. There's no way my mother could have gotten it, who died in 2010. And there's no way my father could have gotten it, who died in 1999. I have no problems with that, you know. I live with her, man. We had All Souls Day. I am Catholic. We are Catholics. We are a community of the church triumphant, the church suffering, and the church militant. So happy Souls Day to all of you out there, and God bless. Welcome back, Bob.
Okay, good to be back, Jack. And that's it for today. We wind up with Drive-Through Jack. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll spend a little more time on war claims then, and perhaps another Joe might want to bring up his topic. See you then.
HD3. The GOP flips Virginia. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News.
We will change the trajectory of this Commonwealth.
Republican Glenn Youngkin, now Virginia's governor-elect.
And friends, we are going to start that transformation on day one.
Youngkin beating former Governor Democrat Terry McAuliffe by just over 2 percentage points. A Fox News voter analysis finds critical race theory in schools was the deciding factor for 25% of Virginia voters. 72% called it an important factor. During a debate, McAuliffe had said he was tired of parents trying to tell schools what to teach their children. The New Jersey governor's race is a virtual dead heat. With 88% of the votes in, Republican challenger Jack Ciattarelli leads incumbent Democrat Governor Phil Murphy by about 1,200 votes.
Very early this morning, both Murphy
We're going to have to wait a little while longer than we had hoped.
and Ciattarelli
I had prepared one hell of a victory speech.
weren't sure who was the winner. Both said there will be more tabulating to do.
We've got to have time to make sure that every legal vote is counted.
And that's how our democracy works.
It's one of the few things Ciattarelli and Murphy agreed on. In New Jersey, a razor-thin margin doesn't trigger an automatic recount, but one can be requested, which could mean a final result may be a while in coming.
Fox's Gernal Scott. Democrat Eric Adams has been elected New York City's mayor, calling for unity.
Today, we take off the intramural jersey and we put on one jersey, Team New York.
His Republican opponent, Curtis Sleep.